The cameras were rolling, the lights blazing, and the tension inside the studio was already sharp enough to cut through. But nothing could prepare the audience for what Donald Trump was about to say. The former president leaned forward in his chair, his lips curling into that familiar smirk that always preceded a jab. He turned toward Denzel Washington, who sat calm and steady just across from him, and let the words fly like daggers. "So, Denzel, tell us," Trump sneered, pausing for effect, "where exactly did you learn English? Because sometimes it sounds like you're trying a little too hard." The crowd gasped. Some laughed nervously, others froze, not sure whether to treat it as a joke or a calculated insult. The host of the program raised a hand as if to intervene, but it was too late. The sting of Trump's words had already electrified the air. It wasn't just a question about language, it was an attempt to belittle, to mock, to strip Denzel of dignity right there on live television. For a brief moment, silence swallowed the stage. The camera zoomed in on Denzel's face, searching for a reaction. He didn't flinch. He didn't roll his eyes or lean back. Instead, his stillness spoke louder than any outburst could. His hands rested calmly on the table, but his gaze locked onto Trump like steel, unwavering, unshaken. The audience felt the temperature in the room rise as if something monumental was about to happen. People leaned forward in their seats, breaths held. This wasn't going to be brushed aside. This wasn't going to be just another Trump jab. Denzel was about to answer, and his response would not only shift the balance in the studio, but send shockwaves across the country. The silence was unbearable. The audience sat frozen, waiting, as if they all knew Denzel was about to unleash something that would cut deeper than any insult. Trump leaned back in his chair, smug and confident, his eyes flicking toward the cameras as if he'd just landed the knockout punch. But Denzel Washington was no ordinary guest, and he was far from finished. Denzel leaned forward, his voice calm but carrying a weight that made every word feel like a hammer striking stone. "You know what's funny, Mr. Trump," he began, his tone steady, not angry, but piercing. "You ask me where I learned English. I learned it the same way I learned discipline, dignity, and truth, from a father who worked 2 jobs, from a mother who prayed for me every night, and from a country that promised me freedom. That's where I learned it. Where did you learn yours?" The audience erupted. Some gasped, others shouted in approval, and the cameras caught Trump's face stiffen. His smirk cracked for the first time. The studio lights, once warm, now felt like a spotlight exposing every twitch in Trump's jaw, every flicker of unease in his eyes. Denzel didn't stop. His words poured out like fire wrapped in ice, controlled, measured, but devastating. "You built towers with other people's money. I built a life with hard work and faith. You mocked people for how they speak, how they look, how they pray. But I ask you this, what do you build when all you have left are insults? What's your legacy then?" The crowd roared to its feet. The energy was electric, like a storm breaking loose. The host tried to regain control, but the moment was gone. This was no longer a simple panel discussion. It was a battle of character, and Denzel had just seized the high ground. Trump shifted in his seat, his fingers tightening around the edge of the desk. The former president wasn't used to being challenged this way. Not by politicians, not by reporters, and certainly not by an actor who had just turned his own insult back on him with the precision of a surgeon. The cameras panned the audience, stunned faces, clenched fists, wide eyes. They weren't just watching television anymore. They were witnessing history in the making. Trump's face flushed a shade of red the cameras couldn't ignore. His jaw clenched, his shoulders stiffened, and the trademark smirk that once shielded him was gone. The audience could feel it, the former president wasn't laughing anymore. He leaned into the microphone, his voice sharp and dripping with venom. "Spare me the lecture, Denzel," Trump snapped, his tone rising with each word. "You stand there preaching about dignity while you've made millions pretending to be other people. I built towers, I ran a country. You act in movies. Don't tell me about legacy." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The hostility in Trump's words cut like glass, and the room braced for Denzel's response. But before Denzel even spoke, Trump kept going, louder now, his hand pounding the table for emphasis. You want to talk about insults? Look at Hollywood. You all sit in your mansions, pretending you care about the American worker, when the truth is you don't know the first thing about sacrifice. I know sacrifice. I've taken hits every day in politics, in the media, from people like you, people who talk, but never build. The audience buzzed with unease, torn between cheers and jeers. Trump's voice thundered, echoing across the studio, you think you can shame me? I've faced worse than you. And guess what? I'm still standing. Stronger than ever. You? You're just another Hollywood hypocrite with a microphone. The energy in the room turned volatile. Some clapped, others booed, and the cameras caught every split-second reaction, the folding arms, the shaking heads, the fists in the air. It wasn't just a debate anymore, it was an open war of words. And yet, Denzel didn't flinch. He didn't blink. He sat still, calm in the storm, his eyes locked on Trump's, his silence cutting louder than any scream. The contrast was stark, Trump raging like a fire out of control, Denzel steady like stone. The host tried to intervene, fumbling with cue cards, but the crowd was glued to the confrontation. Trump leaned back, breathing hard, convinced he had reclaimed the stage. But what no one expected, what everyone now waited for, was how Denzel would answer. Because if his last words had shaken the room, what came next had the power to break it wide open. The silence after Trump's tirade was heavy, almost unbearable. Cameras zoomed in on Denzel, his face still calm, his posture unshaken. The crowd leaned forward, waiting. When he finally spoke, his voice wasn't loud, but it carried a weight that cut deeper than Trump's shouting ever could. You built towers? Denzel said slowly, his eyes never leaving Trump. And how many of those towers were built on the backs of workers you refused to pay? How many lawsuits have followed your name, claiming you cheated the very people who made you rich? The audience erupted, some clapped in agreement, others shouted in protest. Trump shifted in his seat, but Denzel wasn't finished. His tone sharpened, steady as a blade. You ran a country. You didn't run it. You divided it. You turned neighbors against each other for your own gain. And now, you sit here calling me a hypocrite? He leaned closer to the microphone. I've played roles, yes. But at least when the cameras stop rolling, I don't keep pretending. I don't sell lies as truth. The room went still. Trump's eyes narrowed, his jaw twitching, but Denzel's words kept landing like body blows. You call me Hollywood, Denzel continued, but the truth is, you're the greatest actor this country has ever seen. You've been performing your whole life, selling people a version of yourself that doesn't exist. A businessman who can't keep a business alive. A leader who couldn't lead. A man who demands loyalty but never gives it. A wave of murmurs spread across the audience. Some people stood on their feet, others pressed their hands to their mouths. The atmosphere shifted, from entertainment to revelation. Then Denzel leaned back slightly, his expression unreadable, his words measured and deliberate. And since you like talking about legacy, let me tell you something, legacy isn't the buildings you name after yourself. It's not the applause, the money, or the headlines. Legacy is what people remember when the noise is gone. And when it's gone for you, Mr. Trump, they won't remember strength. They'll remember fear. They'll remember chaos. And they'll remember a man who thought shouting made him powerful. The crowd gasped, then roared. Some cheered, some booed, but no one, not a single soul, could look away. The host's voice was drowned out, trying in vain to restore order. And there sat Denzel, calm in the middle of the storm, while Trump seethed, gripping the desk so hard his knuckles turned white. The war wasn't over. It had just escalated. Trump slammed his hand against the desk, the sound echoing like a gavel of fury. Enough, he roared, his face red, eyes blazing. You think you can lecture me, Denzel? You, an actor? A man who gets paid to recite lines someone else wrote? The crowd erupted, some gasped at the sheer aggression, others jeered, feeding the chaos. Trump leaned forward, jabbing a finger in Denzel's direction. You don't know what it means to carry the weight of millions of lives on your shoulders. You don't know what it means to build an empire from nothing. You talk about lawsuits? Every great man has enemies. You talk about division? I call it leadership. At least I had the courage to fight for this country while people like you sat in luxury, hiding behind cameras. His voice cracked with rage, but he pushed on, louder, harsher. You're no hero. You're no leader. You're an entertainer. A product Hollywood sells because America needs distractions. Without scripts, without directors, without applause, you're nothing. Nothing. The audience was in an uproar now, half cheering, half booing. The energy was electric, the air thick with tension. Trump pounded the desk again, his words spitting like fire. And let's get real, he sneered, his lip curling. How dare you question my legacy? I was President of the United States. The most powerful man in the world. And you were what? Playing make-believe for money? Pretending to be men braver, smarter, stronger than you could ever be? Don't confuse the respect people have for your characters with respect for you. They don't know you. They never will. Because behind the camera, you're just another man who got lucky. The insult cut deep, the audience reacting with gasps and scattered applause. Trump's voice thundered one last time, his fist still shaking. Don't you ever stand there and try to put yourself above me. Because you'll never be me. You'll never reach what I've reached. And you'll never understand what it's like to be Donald J. Trump. The studio was chaos, people shouting, cameras scrambling to capture every expression. The host desperately gestured for calm, but it was useless. Trump had unleashed the storm, and Denzel, sitting steady, looked like a man preparing to strike back with precision, not volume. The next move belonged to him. Denzel didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice. He simply leaned forward, his calm presence slicing through the chaos like a blade. The crowd quieted almost instinctively, as if sensing the shift. Donald, he began, his tone steady, deliberate, and cutting, you just proved my point. The audience leaned in. Trump froze, mid-snarl, his chest still heaving from his tirade. You say I read lines. You say I play men braver and stronger than I am. But let me ask you this, why do those lines resonate? Why do those characters stay with people long after the credits roll? It's because the truth I speak on screen is the truth they live off screen. Pain, struggle, resilience. Things you mock. Things you've never understood because you've never had to live them. A hush swept across the studio. Denzel's eyes locked on Trump's, unwavering. You talk about building an empire? Empires don't mean anything if they're built on lies. On hush money. On silencing voices that threaten your image. You built towers of glass and steel, sure. But I've seen men build families, communities, lives, with nothing but grit and faith. And they didn't have to buy silence to keep their houses standing. The crowd stirred, murmurs, a few gasps. Trump's fists clenched tighter. You call me an entertainer, Denzel continued, his voice tightening just enough to carry power. Fine. I'll own that. Because at least I don't hide behind the illusion of being a savior while tearing people apart. At least when I stand in front of millions, I don't pretend to be something I'm not. You've been performing your whole life. Not for art. Not for truth. For applause. The audience broke into applause, raw and unprompted. Trump's face twitched with rage. Denzel didn't stop. He leaned even closer, his voice now a whisper that carried across the entire room. And here's the difference between us, Donald. My legacy doesn't vanish when the cameras turn off. Because mine isn't built on ego. It's built on truth. And truth doesn't need to shout. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the cameras seemed to hesitate, zooming in on Trump's expression, a flicker of shock, disbelief, maybe even fear. Denzel finally leaned back, his calm demeanor unshaken. The studio felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for the explosion that had to come next. The eruption came like a thunderclap. Trump slammed his fist against the desk so hard the microphones rattled. His face flushed a deep red, eyes bulging with fury. "You don't get to lecture me," he roared, his voice echoing through the studio. "You think you're some kind of prophet because you recite lines in a movie? You're nothing but a fraud, Denzel. A Hollywood fake. And these people," he gestured wildly to the audience, his fingers stabbing the air, "they only clap because they're brainwashed." Gasps rippled through the crowd, but Trump didn't stop. He leaned forward, spitting each word like venom. "You want to talk about truth? Let's talk about your truth. You make millions pretending to be the man you'll never be. You hide behind scripts because without them, you're nothing. Nothing. Without Hollywood, nobody would care about you. Nobody would listen." The tension was unbearable. Viewers at home could feel it radiating through their screens. The moderators tried to cut in, but Trump's voice bulldozed everything in its path. "You say I pay for silence?" Trump sneered. "You think you've exposed me? Let me tell you something, those women you're talking about, those so-called scandals, they were nobodies. Nobodies. And if it cost me $280,000 to shut them up, then guess what? I'd pay it again. Because my life is too big, too important to let little people ruin it." The crowd erupted, boos, shocked cries, shouts colliding into chaos. Camera flashes popped from the audience as if the world had just witnessed something unspeakable. Denzel didn't move. He sat in complete stillness, his calm like a mirror reflecting Trump's rage. The contrast was staggering, one man exploding, the other a steady flame refusing to be extinguished. "You think America needs you to speak for them?" Trump bellowed, pointing directly at Denzel. "America needs builders, not actors. Leaders, not pretenders. I've built more in a year than you've done in your entire life." The moderators were shouting now, trying to restore order, but Trump's tirade had swallowed the entire stage. And then, he said it. The line that made the air vanish from the room. "You are nothing without Hollywood, and you'll never be remembered outside of it." The crowd gasped as if struck. Every camera zoomed in, every microphone captured the venom. Denzel finally raised his head, eyes narrowing, preparing his next blow. The silence after Trump's tirade felt heavier than any shout. The audience, the cameras, even the moderators froze, waiting for Denzel to respond. He leaned forward slowly, resting his hands on the table, his eyes never leaving Trump's. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, but it cut like a blade. "Donald," he said calmly, "men who build towers to hide their shame are always terrified of being seen." The words sliced through the studio. For a moment, it was as if the entire set inhaled at once. The audience erupted, not with boos, not with gasps, but with a raw, collective shout of shock. Some clapped, some cheered, others simply covered their mouths. Trump blinked, stunned. The anger on his face flickered into something else, confusion, maybe even fear. For the first time all night, he looked unsure. Denzel didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His calm became the weapon, his stillness a hammer against Trump's storm. "You call me an actor," Denzel continued, his tone sharp as steel. "But here's the truth. At least I never had to pay $280,000 just to keep people from telling the world who I really am. My story speaks for itself. Yours costs you silence." The crowd exploded again, louder this time, their reaction shaking the stage. Cameras zoomed in on Trump, whose lips quivered as he tried to form words. But nothing came. Denzel pressed on, each word deliberate. "You think power is measured in dollars. You think silence can be bought. But respect, Donald, respect can't be purchased." And tonight, the whole world just saw the difference. For a brief, searing moment, Trump looked small. His fists clenched, his body leaned forward as if ready to strike with words, but the weight of Denzel's calm crushed him. The moderators, sensing the seismic shift, tried to regain control, but the crowd wouldn't calm down. The studio became a storm, applause, whistles, shouts, while Trump sat in that noise, visibly shaken, his chest heaving. And there was Denzel, steady, unmoved, his eyes locked on the man unraveling across from him. The cameras captured it perfectly, the image of one man's rage collapsing against another man's composure. The audience would never forget it. Trump tried to speak, his mouth opening and closing like a man drowning, but no words would stick. The cameras caught every twitch, every flicker of panic across his face. That silence, his silence, was louder than anything he could have said. Denzel leaned back in his chair, calm, collected, eyes locked on Trump. And then, without raising his voice, he twisted the knife. "You see, Donald," he said, measured and deliberate, "it's not the accent that bothers you. It's not my voice. It's that I don't need to shout to be heard. I don't need to buy silence to keep secrets buried. The truth follows you, no matter how much you spend trying to bury it." The audience roared. Some jumped to their feet, clapping so hard their hands echoed like gunfire. Others whistled, chanting Denzel's name. The studio wasn't just watching a debate anymore, it was witnessing a man dismantle another in real time. Trump slammed his fist on the table, the microphone shaking with the impact. "Lies. All lies," he barked, his voice cracking. But the crack betrayed him. It wasn't strength, it was desperation. Denzel didn't flinch. He leaned forward again, the faintest smile playing at his lips. "Funny," he said, tilting his head. "When the truth is a lie, why do you always look so afraid of it?" The words hit like a thunderclap. The audience erupted into chaos, cheers, laughter, gasps. Even the moderators couldn't hide their shock. One of them lowered his head, as if trying to hide a grin. Trump pointed across the table, his face flushed red. "You don't know me. You don't know anything." Denzel stayed still, letting the storm rage. His composure became unbearable, a mirror Trump couldn't stand to look into. "I don't need to know you," Denzel replied softly. "The whole world already does." That sentence landed like a knockout punch. The crowd lost control. They weren't just reacting anymore, they were chanting, clapping, stomping their feet. The cameras shook as the studio pulsed with energy, the sound blasting into millions of homes. And Trump sat there, fists clenched, breathing heavy, swallowed by the noise. Denzel didn't move, he didn't need to. He had already won the moment, not with volume, not with rage, but with precision, truth, and a calm that burned hotter than any fire Trump could summon. The studio would never recover, the noise in the studio was deafening. Viewers at home could feel the vibration of the crowd through their screens. Trump sat stiff, jaw clenched, trying to shout over the chaos, but his words were swallowed whole by the roar of the audience. Denzel, still seated, raised one hand. Slowly, calmly. The gesture alone hushed the studio, as if he commanded silence not by force but by gravity. Even the moderators leaned in, sensing that something was coming, something final. Trump sneered, his voice trembling, "You think you're better than me? You think you can stand here and lecture me?" Denzel didn't flinch. His eyes burned with a steady fire as he leaned into the microphone. "I don't need to think I'm better," he said, voice steady, cutting through the silence like a blade. "Because tonight, Donald, you proved to everyone that the loudest man in the room is often the weakest one." The studio gasped. That line hit like a shockwave, rippling through every corner of the audience. People leapt to their feet, clapping, shouting, chanting Denzel's name. Some were crying, others shaking their heads in disbelief. It wasn't just a debate anymore, it was history being written on live television. Trump tried to rise, his chair scraping the floor, but the sound was drowned out by the chant that spread through the crowd like wildfire. "Denzel! Denzel! Denzel!" For the first time all night, the cameras caught Trump hesitating, his face red, his body tense, his words failing him. He raised his fist, slammed it on the podium, but the image was unmistakable, a man cornered, overpowered, stripped of his usual dominance. Denzel stood. Just stood. No gestures, no shouts, no theatrics. His very presence silenced the chant for one final moment. He leaned toward the microphone, his voice low but sharp, designed to echo beyond the walls of that studio. America doesn't need another man shouting from a podium. It needs someone who listens, who stands tall without tearing others down. And that will never be you. The room exploded. Applause thundered, feet stomped, and chants returned louder than ever. Cameras zoomed in on Trump's frozen face, then on Denzel, who simply stepped back from the podium, composed and unshaken. That was the image the world saw, Trump raging against a storm he couldn't control, and Denzel, calm, resolute, unbreakable. Walking away as the undeniable victor. America doesn't need another man shouting from a podium. It needs someone who listens, who stands tall without tearing others down. And that will never be you.